Hello, welcome to Mike's Mass Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Pashota. Happy Saturday to you. And we're recording this unusually right after a Mets game, in this case, a Met loss, 5-3 to the St. Louis Cardinals. And I generally do not record after games, but because of the weekend and because it's been a long break in between me recording any episodes, I just wanted to put one out tonight and talk about the Mets and what I've seen over the last course of the week. As I mentioned, the St. Louis Cardinals taking the game today 5-3 after the Mets victory yesterday. It was a pretty definitive victory on the back of a pretty great start from Tyler McGill. The Mets were hoping to maintain some type of continuity, consistency going into the second game of this series. Unfortunately, as has been the norm for much of this season, the Mets are unable to maintain their winning ways. So their winning streak stops at 2. They drop a game to the team that is the worst team in the National League this year, St. Louis Cardinals, and it's hard to pick disappointing teams. I mean, which team is the most disappointing based off of preseason expectations. The Mets are certainly high on that list because everybody had kind of put them in as a top 5 team, and they have as far as we've seen right now, and it's pretty much been what we can see, that this is not a top 5 team. So we're not a bottom 5 team, I would say, but we are certainly in the lower echelon of the National League and of the entire major leagues. Part of it has just been a really inconsistent pitching staff, and you were kind of expecting this with Kodai Senga because Senga's just been so back and forth in his performances, and in this one, he just kind of made 2 critical errors in this one, I will say, and it was the 2 home runs that he allowed in the first 3 innings of the game. The first one going to Paul Goldschmidt, who run home run in the top of the second, and then Jordan Walker homering in the top of the third. And at that point, the Mets were down 4-1, and they just weren't able to kind of take their way out of that hole. The home runs, I would say, a little surprising. Senga, for his inconsistencies, he's not really a guy who gives up a lot of home runs, I would say. It's really been more of his control that really needs to be worked on, his mechanics, really. Because I would say, for the most part, he's been pretty consistent with that. His home run rate, about 1 a game. 1 per 9 innings, yeah. So and had only allowed, up going into this game, 7 home runs over the course of the season. So he certainly wasn't like Max Scherzer. Scherzer, for his entire career, has been one of those very inconsistent in terms of allowing home runs. But I felt pretty confident that Senga can generally keep it in the ballpark. But in this one, the Cardinals, and again, the Cardinals, a bad team, a team that shouldn't be hitting multiple home runs against you, let's say that. But as I mentioned, Senga, it's just one of those things where he just cannot put it together back-to-back starts yet. When he does, he's going to be really, really good. As of right now, he's kind of towing the line between average and, borderline sensational at times. I mean, in this game, he strikes out 8 batters, and this is a game where he didn't really look like he had his best stuff. One thing encouraging, he only allowed 1 walk, and again, it comes with the caveat of you're doing this against one of the worst teams in Major League Baseball, the worst team in the National League, but it's... You gotta kind of take these little things with it. He also strikes out 8 batters, and helpfully he managed to, even in a somewhat mediocre performance from him, managed to go 6 2/3. So helpful in terms of keeping everything better for the Met bullpen. They didn't have to overwork them in a game where he early on did not look like he had it. But I was glad to see that he was able to kind of stick it out and pitch at least somewhat deep into this game. So that was nice to see, but disappointing performance from Senga. And from the Mets offense, who were kind of pushed around by Adam Wainwright at this point. And Adam Wainwright is one of those guys I'm always like, Oh yeah, he's still in baseball. That's because I felt like he was gone for like several times over the course of my entire life, but he just keeps like sticking around. He just keeps hanging around in the Cardinals uniform. He'll just probably die in a Cardinals uniform. That's just gonna be the Mets' luck. And Wainwright has never had like a lot of success against the Mets, although it feels like to Met fans that he consistently is the guy who comes up against him in situations and seems to come out on top. But for his career, actually, has never really pitched that great against the Mets. Minus, of course, that the NLCS performance in 2006. But this was a performance. This was a pitching matchup where you would figure Kodai Senga would have the advantage, but ultimately, the Met offense really just couldn't take advantage of it. Or rather Wainwright, would go 6 1/3 innings, allow 7 hits, 3 earned runs. Ultimately, outdueled Senga in this game, and this was a pretty not like flawless, but he managed to avoid any major mistakes. His biggest one coming late in the game, in the bottom of the fifth. Not late in the game, the bottom of the fifth, but it was Luis Guillorme, of all people, hitting a 2-run home run to center, and hit it pretty deep. And you could kind of put it on the winds kind of dragging that ball out of the ballpark. But this was a situation where Guillorme was homering. It was the first time of the season, his first time home run since I believe it was July 22nd of last year. So it was like his home run hitting about as rare as like someone like Ray Ordonez. Ordonez like would famously only hit like one home run a season, like every year. So Guillorme, roughly that like rate of home run hitting, it's just not really his game. And his game is really more of the singles and playing defense. Although in this one he actually made some questionable defensive plays. Actually coming away with his second error of the season, and it was a little surprising. Whenever Guillorme makes errors, just because he's so confident and sure of himself on that field with his glove work, I'm always a little surprised. Kind of like with Lindor, when Lindor makes any kind of like throwing error or fielding error, it's always a little bit surprising because they're both so adept at it. But Guillorme, I mean, that was pretty much the highlight of this game, was that 2-run home run, and of course Brandon Nimmo starting off the game with his 7th home run of the season, and kept things going for him. He's had a nice week, and coming off the series against the Yankees, that huge clutch game-winning hit in the second game of that series, and then coming here and hitting a home run, and it's been a nice go, but the Mets offense just really wasn't able to summon much in this game. Ultimately finishing with 9 base hits, but they're mostly just kind of scattered. They weren't able to kind of pick up the guys in fielding position. Jeff McNeil, big over, which was a little disappointing coming after that really strong performance in the first game of the series. But Daniel Vogelback would come up with a single. That was nice to see. Vogelback continue his hitting after kind of breaking through that big home run yesterday, and following it up. And we just didn't really see anything that looked like the Mets were kind of charged up. And I will look at the quote that Vogelback gave in to reporters after the Game 1 victory, where he kind of like hedged his bets. He sounded, he said hopefully it was, and I'm going to paraphrase, but he basically says, hopefully this is going to be the start of something where we can kind of play more consistently. And it's the quote where somebody gives where your team just feels completely unconfident in anything that they are doing right now. And this is the honest truth. They are, every sense of the word, they are a very flawed team. They cannot do anything consistently back to back. There is no situation where the pitching can kind of pitch strongly in back to back games. The offense can't seem to summon more than maybe like 1 or 2 runs in back to back games. It's a really disconcerting feeling because they just can't really get it going. And without Alonso in the middle of their lineup, they look a lot weaker, and they didn't have Francisco Lindor in the game either today. So you had a lineup of Nimmo and Marte at the top, and then McNeil and Tommy Pham batting cleanup with Brett Beatty and Francisco Alvarez backing them up, and that's a lineup that just doesn't look very strong at all. And truthfully, even with Alonso in there, it's just not that good a group. They have not performed up to their standards, and the result of it is, because of this, they are continuing to struggle and find their way back into the wild card race, which is really kind of their only option at this point because they are so far behind Atlanta. They have not taken advantage of anything in these situations. This is a series where they conceivably could sweep if they were playing up to their expectations, but they just can't. And because of that, they continue to dwindle under 500. And if you cannot take advantage of these series against the weaker teams, and let's be honest, there are a lot of weak teams in Major League Baseball this year. It's a really weird year where you had a lot of teams get off to really terrible starts that people were not expecting. Like, I was looking through the standings yesterday, and it was one of those things where you're like, are the Blue Jays struggling to stay above 500? How come the Astros are struggling to stay above 500? How come the Mariners can't seem to get it together? They're in fourth place right now. Everyone was picking the Mariners as a major wild card team this year, and then you of course have the NL East, and who would have expected that the Phillies and Mets would be so far out of first place, and the Braves are just rolling away with that division. And the surprise of the Miami Marlins, how well that team has played, and it's just kind of thrown everyone off a little bit by how poorly some of these clubs that looked really good on paper and everyone was predicting. I mean, this was not just people, not just ESPN or anything like that, but it was publications like Baseball America, and the PECOTA standings that were putting the Mets as the likely division favorite. So who analyzed that incorrectly? And I think you got to point to the fact that people couldn't have really expected that Verlander and Scherzer were going to pitch so poorly earlier in the year, that Verlander was going to miss most of April, and then they wouldn't have Jose Quintana and then they lost Edwin Diaz, and I think some of these projections came out after the Diaz injury, but it really did throw a lot of things off, and no one really knows where exactly it got thrown off so much, but because of the inconsistencies of not just the pitching staff, but also the offense and the bullpen, we are looking at a team that seems to not really have an identity right now, and particularly with Alonso out, it doesn't seem to have any energy, and you have kind of bleak baseball. Going into Sunday, it's Father's Day. We're hoping for a Met win tomorrow, so that all of our fathers who are Met fans, particularly my father, can come away with a nice victory and celebrate something nice for Father's Day. And this is again, I will refrain back to it repeatedly. The St. Louis Cardinals should not be giving the Mets this much trouble, but the Mets are in such a weird place right now that it feels like they could either dominate tomorrow or come away looking really bad again. And losing 2 out of 3 to the Cardinals is not a good look. You really don't want that. This is kind of like when they were going before they had that weird run where they kept walking off in the middle of May. Where they dropped the series to the Washington Nationals, and that was the precursor. And I think that's when I had put it in that podcast episode. I'm pretty sure that's the title did that we were in trouble, and it was at that point, I think later that same week, that they were winning all those games. But it feels like we're in that similar sort of spot right now with the Mets, where they need to start. We've progressed past this point. We're in the middle of June now, where they cannot continue to keep stepping on themselves and continue to just strike out, for lack of a better word, whenever they come into a situation where they should be taking advantage of it. And it's really, this is a major league team going up against not like a not like a slow pitch softball team, but this is the St. Louis Cardinals have been a incredibly disappointing group. One that has not had good pitching. Adam Wainwright has not had a good year. Wainwright is not dominant Cy Young caliber winning Adam Wainwright. He has been thoroughly average, but you could say that for some of the Mets pitchers also. So these are two very disappointing teams that have not really gotten together, and the result of it is a series that's been back and forth more so than you would really expect. And Game 3 of this series tomorrow is going to be really anybody's guess what exactly is going to happen. So we have Game 3 tomorrow, and it will be looking at the pitching matchup: Carlos Carrasco versus Matthew Liberatore. Two pitchers with a 5 ERA, so it's going to be a real showcase of pitching talent. So again, Carrasco has been another guy who's been wildly inconsistent, and the fact that the veterans have not really played the form this season has been pretty unfortunate. It's really kind of been put on the backs of Alonso and Francisco Alvarez and David Robertson in the bullpen, and Brandon Nimmo in center. And that's really it in terms of guys who are like playing to their ability right now. Because everyone else has just been struggling. I'll also say Senga that has also pitched well, but it's the inconsistency of Jeff McNeil. This is the reigning batting champion. He just can't get it together, really, seemingly, on a day-to-day basis. Francisco Lindor has been pretty tough to watch this year. Brett Beatty has had flashes where he's looked good, and I like that he had 2 hits today, but he hasn't really been able to put it together consistently for himself either, which is also unfortunate because they don't really have any better options at third base, so they got to keep going with Beatty and hope that he can kind of get it together. Also, he's got to show some more power at the plate also. And the veterans in the corner outfield spots, Canha and Marte, it's just been... can these guys get together for more than 2 games at a time? Because you can't really just go 2 games hitting and then 5 games off. It's not really the best way to keep winning. And Canha's been pretty disappointing in terms of his career. And I don't really know what to say about Canha, and I don't really know what to say about Marte. Marte is apparently aged like 10 lifetimes in the course of 1 season. But we are looking at a situation where they could potentially lose this game tomorrow. I'm hoping not, but I'm not going to hold my breath and expect that we can really count on Carlos Carrasco to pick up this big win. And it is a big win because not just because of Father's Day, but they're going to go on a 6-game road trip now, and they're going to have to face the reigning world champions, the Houston Astros, and then you go into Philadelphia, and then you could potentially make some ground up there, but there's really no telling. I don't really know what to make of the Phillies either. The Phillies have also been a really wildly inconsistent team. One that can look really good offensively, but then look really bad offensively. It's just been that kind of year, and it feels like some teams have taken advantage of it more than other teams. I think that's why you see teams like the Miami Marlins up in the standings right now. Why the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Cincinnati Reds are near the top of the NL Central. Why the Arizona Diamondbacks are hanging around at the top as well. So not to mention the Texas Rangers. A lot of teams that are young teams that people were kind of expecting to be middling, maybe 500 teams that have like jumped up and have flown through. And I can only really put it on the new rules that Major League Baseball put through this year, where I think some teams just take advantage of it more than others. I think a team that's largely veterans like the Mets, they can kind of struggle to get out of the gate fast. And Who knows? It may eventually come back later in the year that the veterans may end up playing for him, and some of the younger guys like Alvarez and Beatty, Vientos, potentially Ronnie Mauricio, may be playing at a higher rate also. But there's at where we are right now, you can't keep saying, oh, okay, well maybe later in the year they'll get together. You're running out of time, and it's funny to say that in June, but realistically, we're almost halfway through the season now. So you have to figure that what the Mets have is probably their team, and how they're going to be playing for the most of the year. Things may change, but something drastic has to change for this team also. And I won't say firing somebody is necessarily a change-worthy incident that needs to happen here, but it's clear that something is not right in Metland, and because of that, and the fact that no one seems to be able to kind of put together what exactly is the issue, other than they need to change things up, we are looking at a situation where the Mets may keep going into this year further and further, and by maybe August and September, you realize that the team is too far out at this point, and they have to kind of shut it down. And then you have to look back on the year and say, what exactly went wrong for this team, and what can we do to improve it? I'm not saying that it's a lost cause yet, but the further we go into the season, the bleaker and bleaker it's looking. And I don't really know if there is a situation yet that may be able to fix it, if there is a player that they can bring in, if there is a call up there, if there's a subtraction by addition or addition by subtraction that can happen to help improve this team. And at the moment, I have no faith, and it's unfortunate when you lose your faith in your team. They have to win for me to kind of feel that way. I can't just I can't give blindly and say this team is going to recover and all of a sudden right the way. I'm not saying tear everything down, but I also have to realistically look at it and say this is not a team that's playing like a potentially playoff contender or even a World Series contender. And at the moment, I think they are really looking more and more like they are going to miss the playoffs. Things may change, but to hold out for hope like that at the moment seems somewhat ridiculous. I don't really know where we are as a team and as an organization, and the further we continue to kind of look around in the dark for it, you're going to realize that this is a team that's not a bad team necessarily, just inconsistent, and inconsistencies make the team play worse than they really should be playing. And I don't know if they can kind of right that, if they can find consistency, because they have displayed no evidence that they can. They have displayed nothing that makes me think that tomorrow they can come out and play like a winning ball club and continue that for the remainder of next week and the week after that. There's no evidence of that, and because of that, you have to put in the expectation that this is a team that's going to fall short. Thank you for listening to Mike's Mets podcast. Please be sure to follow us on Spotify and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Finally, please also follow the podcast Twitter, which is Mike's Mets Pod, all one word. Appreciate your time and have a wonderful rest of your day or evening. Let's go, Mets.